How's it going, y'all? Chad Fox here. Another Have a Drink with Chad Fox creative writing. I'm actually going to change the name of this segment to Thirsty Thursdays because it's shorter and easier to remember. I'm going to start off reading a couple quotes from Flower Thoughts. This quote is by Elizabeth Browning. He likes the poor things of the world the best. I would not therefore, if I could, be rich. It pleasures him to stoop for buttercups. It's a good one. The next quote is by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Fame is the scentless sunflower with gaudy crown of gold, but friendship is the breathing rose with sweets in every fold. I'm gonna kick it off with a new song that I recorded. It's actually a rap song, and just a heads up, there are curse words. I'm also going to drop some links to our sponsor, which is EBG Guitars from El Bobby Gato. I see Deborah, Donna, and James have joined us. Good to see you. Just one moment. I'm also going to drop a link to James's SoundCloud and again a link to EBG Guitars, Custom Guitars, Facebook group. The beat for this rap song was produced by my cousin, Bo Kennedy.
Forget what's right. Murder your parents with a butcher knife. Yeah, then take your life. No more bank accounts and government secrecy. You become the shooter with a plastic gun printed in 3D. This just in a Xanax prescription for mentally ill children to make them efficient. Training in schoolyards for suicide missions. Process Orion, military equipment. Listen.
Alright, y'all. If you just joined us, this is Thirsty Thursdays with Chad Fox. Gonna be having my last drink probably of this Cuddy Sark blended Scotch whiskey. It's been really good and smooth. If you notice, I have a new awesome drinking glass that was given to me by Deborah, who has also joined us, Infoxicated. If you know me, you know that I love foxes. And who doesn't? Gotta love that sound there. Looks like Jenny Woods just joined us. Hey Jenny, good to see you. Oh, that's good. Alright, y'all, so we're going to continue our creative writing session for our short story, How Thought Became Ruler. If you're new and don't know the storyline yet, around this time, a single thought took over the entire planet. And 300 years from now, which our story is set in, it has ruled for 300 years, a single thought. And so, cheers, Deborah. I don't know who else is drinking, but cheers to whoever. I know James said he's drinking sparkling water. Wetting your lips is very important for writing. Got to get in that zone. Glad you're here, Jenny. So, just to go over the thought, the underlining thought that controls the world, as we've kind of brainstormed a little bit, is going to be time conformity, which is that everyone in a singularity decided on one schedule of time conformity. And since everyone's thoughts merged into this same conformity, it did away with things like crime and there was even an authority behind it, right? That you couldn't do anything but this conformity. But last time we had gone over a few characters. We had decided that the main character's name would be Bart and that his last name would be the name of a bass player. I've chosen Claypool for Les Claypool. So the main character's name is Bart Claypool. So Deborah said she had a few ideas. She can share them in the comments or share them later. I am actually going to start a blog after this that will be called How Thought Became Ruler, so that we can take all this down and everyone has a place to go to look at the ideas. I've also decided we're going to move ahead with the first part of the story because we've done a lot of brainstorming at this point. I see my mom joined us, Sherry. Great to see you, Mom. Take a look, make sure everything's looking good. Cool. I have also made a whiteboard that is actually yellow. When I switch to the whiteboard or yellow board, let me know if the glare is too much on it. I might dedicate an actual whiteboard to the next ones. I'll also include a link to the new blog in a post in the this weekend probably. So Deborah says, let's make Bart the coolest ever but very smart scientist, which is a good idea. He's actually the one who is going to start to question the conformity of time. And we're going to label him in the end a thought experimentist. If that's the right term, but I've decided his actual role as a scientist is behavioral science. So he's at the head of a department that outlines the behavior of the conformity, right, of the singularity. So I also wanted to make the story a little more dynamic, and when we write the first part of the story, I think we should write it from not the point of view of Bart, but from the point of view of a detective. And where the detective comes in is that in the first time in 300 years, a crime has been committed. And then so today we're going to figure out what that crime may be. Deborah says far out with maybe paranormal. I think we should definitely add something supernatural to this, maybe. We had mentioned time travel. I like time travel. We could maybe even have a segment of the story where a time traveler appears and gives a warning and then disappears. Something like that. There's actual conspiracy accounts of people who have shown up to the Pentagon saying they're from the future and disappearing mysteriously, and there's actual accounts of things like that. So we're going to let this go for about an hour. Last time we did 45 minutes, I didn't feel like it was enough. The time before we did over an hour and it felt like just a little too much, so we're going to do an hour. We're going to wrap this up at 9, and I'm actually probably going to push these Thirsty Thursdays to either 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. because I know some people have schedules where they need to get to sleep and get to work the next morning, so we'll see what works. I'm thinking maybe 6 p.m. That gives people time to get home. And what do y'all think about 6 p.m.? Alright, so I actually thought of a name for the detective already. In the spirit of Thirsty Thursdays and having a drink, we are going to make the Detective Barstool. Tell me what y'all think. I think a lot of detectives probably have a drinking problem. The problem being they don't drink enough. Alright, so Detective Barstool. I have a character map written on the whiteboard, which I'll change the camera around to here in a minute. Just wanted to talk to y'all for a minute here. Sip a little of my drink. So we're going to have a third character. We actually talked about it last time, another scientist, a female scientist. I believe last time James had an idea. I can't remember what the name was. But in the spirits of keeping with bass players and drinks, I think we should have her last name be something witty as well. Any thoughts on the name of the female character? First name? I'm going to throw the name Cynthia out there. While Bart is the cool-headed, smart scientist, Cynthia is more of the sinner. The one who may push Bart to go beyond his limits of the conformity and to consider consider the crime that has been committed. Let's also come up with the crime. Deborah says, what are the ages of these guys? That's a good question. So Detective Barstool, we're going to put in his 40s. So let's just say 41 years old. Bart Claypool, let's go ahead and put him at about 34 years old. Alright, I think we're going to go with Cynthia for the first name. For the third character. Knight was the last name. I love that. Let's go with Cynthia Knight. Sins of the Night. Right? We're going to make her a little younger. We're going to make her 28 years old. So our main character is Bart Claypool, 34 years old. His assistant, Cynthia Knight, 28 years old. And Detective Barstool is going to be 41, and he's a seasoned detective. Now, in this future scenario, there really are no crimes, right? So why are there detectives? The detectives don't necessarily investigate crimes at this point, more as they follow up with everyone on the conformity. So they're more of like a social character, except now there has been a new crime, right? And the crime that we choose, I think it shouldn't be like a bad crime. It should be something that's a thought, right? Outside of the time conformity. So let's think about that. Sherry says adding an antagonist would be good at some point to move the story forward, which is definitely what we're going to need there. I'm thinking the antagonist could maybe be like the secretary of something. So in this new utopia, we'll have we won't really mention a president, more as we'll just have some other positions like secretary of something. So let's just call it, I don't want it to be too much like 1984 with thought police and things like that. It's more like behavior police. And the government is more of and also a social thing. So it would be, if Bart is the lead scientist on behavior, then maybe the secretary would be something like Secretary of Control or something like that. So let's just put a question mark around our next antagonist character. For those of you that don't know how stories work, the antagonist is the one who's kind of the bad guy. The one who creates a conflict, right? I think it should be something sinister, even though he's the secretary of time. We should give him some kind of really sinister name. Okay, I'm gonna leave you 1 second here. I'm going to switch us on over to the whiteboard, or in this case, the yellow board. So the camera's going to get a little bumpy for a second, guys. Just to give you all a little view here of an EBG custom bass guitar. I do play an EBG. I love it. It's a jazz model shape guitar. Okay. Can everyone see the whiteboard? Y'all let me know if you're having any problems seeing the whiteboard. I'm going to add the name Cynthia Knight to our second character. And Detective Barstool. And then we're going to add a fourth position for the antagonist. With a little question mark beside it there. Alright, so Thursdays with Chad Fox. The short story idea is How Thought Became Ruler. So, everyone says they can see. Donna suggested the name Lecter for the antagonist. I don't really want to pull from, stories that already exist, I think. Hannibal Lecter, I think, is where she's going with there. Maybe we can make a variation of Lecter for the first name. I kind of like the name Luther being the first name, so that it's not too much like Lex Luthor or Hannibal Lecter. What do y'all think of the first name as Luther for the antagonist? I also just had a good idea for maybe the character position of the antagonist. What if Luther or Hector, I like the name Hector. Hector is hectic, right? So for the first name, let's go with Hector. What do y'all think? And so the character idea for Hector, the antagonist, maybe he's a fourth scientist, right? Maybe he's Bart Claypool's counterpart in the behavior science. So maybe he's the one that's saying, we shouldn't go against the time conformity. What do y'all think about that? Deborah says good. I like the name Hector. I'm going to go ahead and add that. We can come up with the last name later. So for the story idea, I want to start the story off with the news broadcasting that the first crime in 300 years has been committed. So let's go with Act 1. The crime. Okay. So now we need to figure out what's the crime. And like I said, I don't think we want it to be... yes, Deborah. Hector will be the troublemaker, also called the antagonist of a story. He's the one that's going to present a conflict. So, let's start with, like I said, there's going to be a broadcast of the first ever crime was committed. And it's going to be a thing that's not terrible, and it's more of a thought that went beyond the time conformity, right? And what the behavior scientists are going to bring from that is, wait a minute, you can do that, right? Because for 300 years they've all been in this singularity where there is a time conformity where no one has gone beyond that. And so let's think of a small time crime that would have to do with thinking outside of the conformity. So the conformity itself It's going to be the theme. Time conformity. Time conformity is the theme here. So when we say time conformity and a thought that has become ruler, we're talking about like a set day for every single person. A lot of this we're going to pull from what we are in now, right? Because we are being ruled by time. Time dictates what time most people get up. It dictates when they eat breakfast. It dictates when they go to work. So the time conformity is going to be a set schedule, okay? So when everyone is on a set schedule and conform to time in a theme and singularity that no one was forced into this, everyone just came together in a single thought and a single theme that this is how it works, right? Breakfast, work, lunch, return from work, dinner, sleep, okay? So the crime that's going to be committed that we're thinking of, I think, should be something similar to breaking the time schedule. Someone does not come in for curfew, right? Someone breaks curfew. So let's go ahead and set the schedule here. Under here. Let's see make sure that's in the shot. Okay, so the schedule is going to be breakfast, work, lunch, home, dinner, and sleep. Deborah says maybe someone doesn't go to work on time. That's good. Probably the one thing that makes the whole theme and time conformity work is that everyone works, right? There isn't really a money where people get paid more than the other, which is what makes this futuristic time a kind of utopia, is that everyone gets paid the same, sort of like socialism, except maybe maybe the fifth character, which would be the secretary of enforcement, let's say, maybe the secretary of enforcement is breaking protocol, right? And he hasn't been going to work or doing the conforming to the schedule at all. That's just a thought. But let's go ahead and make the crime that is committed not coming to work. I like that idea. So for the first time ever in 300 years, a person has broke the time conformity and did not show up for work. And so let's think of something funny and quirky that they did instead of work. Maybe they went and ate ice cream, or maybe they used it for creative purposes, right? Because I feel like in this future, where is there a place for things like art, you know, and for the creative process? Maybe one thing time conformity has done is it has shunned creative thought, right? So when someone doesn't show up for work, it actually gets broadcasted on the news as a crime, right? So the main population just thinks this person's committed a crime, right? Because they're not thinking outside of the time conformity. So the first one that might actually think, hey, we can do that, we're going to go ahead and say Bart considers that first. And then brings it up to both Cynthia and Hector. Bart himself is questioning why the person would do that. Hector is also strongly against it. But Cynthia might be the little devil on the shoulder, right? Who's saying, you know, we can do that? We can not show up to work? Maybe we should think about this. Thinking being the thought that goes outside of the main conformity, right? We can do that? James Allen says reminds him of Anthem. Looks like my sister Kimberly has just joined us. Welcome, Kimberly. This is Thirsty Thursdays with Chad Fox. For anyone who's just joined us, we are working on a creative writing short story for a story that is called How Thought Became Ruler. And so in this story, in our time now, everyone's thoughts came together in a singularity that there should be a set schedule. And it just made everything work so good that it's lasted for 300 years, okay? So it's called the time conformity, with a set schedule where everyone eats, works, comes home, and sleeps at the same time. But what we have here is we have the first person who did not show up for work in 300 years, which was reported as a crime. But so everyone is seeing it as a crime, and it's being discussed by the behavior scientist, who is one of our main characters, Bart Claypool, and his assistants and peers. And the very first of the story, Detective Barstool is going to be dispatched to interview the person who didn't show up for work, right? So now we're going to need a fifth person. This person's not going to be a main character. They actually might even be imprisoned for not showing up for work, right? So we're going to need a name for them. Deborah says thinking is a crime in itself. And that is kind of the point, right? Because the one singularity time conformity is the law. So when this person decided not to show up for work, it was a thought. Before they didn't show up for work, it wasn't just an impulse. That person thought, what if I go get ice cream instead? So I think ice cream's quirky, but not quirky enough, right? What is something that someone who has shown up for work their entire life, their ancestors for 3 generations has never broke the conformity? What is it that they wanted to do? What thought did they have that said, you know what? Instead of work, I think I'm going to visit a park. I think I'm going to go get ice cream, right? It can be something really simple, a fun thought. Donna came up with the name Jax, which anyone who has watched Sons of Anarchy loves the character Jax. I like the name Jax. His actual name was Jackson, but we're going to make the last name of the person who committed the crime Jax. So we're going to need a first name for our little time bandit here. Okay, so a fun thought, y'all. What's a fun thought? Something that is so simple yet still broke the pattern. Because the time conformity and the thought that became ruler, right, is a pattern. A singularity and a pattern. What would break the pattern? What would make you wake up and all of a sudden have a thought which says, today I'm going to visit a park. I'm going to go for a walk. So we've got go out and eat ice cream, go to a park, go for a walk. Any other ideas? Sherry says a singular, fun, free thought, which I like. James says maybe he sees a fox and follows it into the woods. I like that. I like that metaphor. I myself have used that metaphor many times. It's actually part of my spirituality, is that anytime that I'm confronted with a path in front of me, left and right, it's been my experience that in my dreams and in my soul, a fox jumps out, and instead of taking the left-hand path, which was easy but would destroy me in the end, he goes to the right, which is the hard path, right? But the hard path leads to happiness. So I don't know that I want to use that because I've used that theme a lot, but I do still like it. James says maybe the fox doesn't exist, but it's a glitch in the fabric of space. Okay, so I like this idea, and we're actually going to add a sixth character here. Instead of a thought, me being Chad Fox, maybe let's make the reason that the character Jax, for now, has a thought that says, hey, I don't want to go to work today, is that a character, an actual person, not a fox, comes out of nowhere when he's getting ready for work and says, hey, I'm from the future and you're doing this all wrong. Why don't you go for a walk and think about it? And this character, whose last name is Fox, will disappear but reappear multiple times, right? Because he's from the future, returning to guide our characters, which Jax, who is the main character, is actually going to be locked away and not be a main character. So we're going to name it the time traveler Frank Fox. Okay. So Frank Fox appears to Jax. Jax is the person who wakes up one day and says, something's not right, and he's visited by Frank Fox, who is a real person who actually has Jax think, right? He says, why don't you go for a walk and think about it? So Jax, instead of going to work, goes for a walk. So let's make the crime going for a walk. Something as simple and pleasurable as going for a walk. So the thought that caused the crime is something as simple as going for a walk. instead of going to work, right? Which is against the law. It's against the law of the time conformity, because everyone has a set schedule. Breakfast, work, lunch, home, dinner, sleep. And now when the character Jax does not go to work and instead goes for a walk, it causes a national uproar, right? It's actually reported on the TV, let's say on the podcast. We're not going to use television in this. In the future, there's only podcasts. What do y'all think of that? The future does not have television. It has podcasts. Now, the podcast can be video podcasts and audio podcasts, but the news itself is even reported in podcast themes. So, news equals podcast. So, when Jax doesn't show up for work and instead goes for a walk because he was visited by a mysterious character who claims to be from the future named Frank Fox, he then goes for a walk and is arrested by a beat cop for not going to work, and it's actually reported on the news podcast, the national news podcast, as a crime. And so when that's reported as a crime, it's the talk of the whole nation, right? It's the first crime in 300 years. This person, Jax, he's messing everything up. He's changing the conformity, the schedule. And so the first thing that happens is Detective Barstool gets dispatched to understand. Because, he's a behavior detective, a social detective. Why did you go for a walk instead of coming to work, Jax? We want to know. Well, Jax doesn't give up Frank Fox, right? He's going to keep that silent. So he's going to be locked up for that. Just for now, we're going to call Jax James Jax, or JJ. So JJ doesn't show up for work, which causes him to be arrested and then interrogated by Detective Barstool. Barstool wants to know from JJ, why didn't you come into work? Why did you go for a walk? That makes no sense. You broke the time conformity. And of course, thinking everyone might think he's crazy, JJ doesn't mention that he was visited by someone claiming to be a time traveler. So he's being held. And while he's being held, Detective Barstool is going to have to approach Bart Claypool, the head of the science department for behavior, for social behavior, right? Because he needs to understand. He needs to understand why JJ would have broke the conformity when the conformity equals peace. If everyone's at work the same time, if everyone's eating the same time, there's no place for bad things to happen in this new world, right? This new future. James says he likes where this is going. I feel like now we're actually getting somewhere. The last few times we've been brainstorming, we've been kind of putting things together, but we haven't had a clear vision. I think we have a clear vision now. We have the theme, which is time conformity and the set schedule, creating a singularity through the future where everyone gets used to the same thing, which eliminates what we would call bad things, right, and crimes. But crimes aren't as simple as good and bad. Nothing's as simple as good and bad, and we're going to have to bring that up multiple times, that the polarity, I don't know if you can read that, my writing there's a little bad, good versus bad. In the movie Donnie Darko, there is a guest speaker who is speaking to the class who's actually Patrick Swayze. I love Patrick Swayze. R.I.P. Patrick Swayze. He was a great man from Dallas, Texas. But just as I loved how, so Patrick Swayze was trying to teach that you just need to block out the bad thoughts. And that everything falls into two categories, good and bad. And what Donnie Darko brought up in that class period, which he was actually reprimanded for, was that all the complexities of human nature cannot fall into just good or bad. And I don't know if y'all have noticed this, but polarity rules us. We have the left and the right, good and bad, good versus evil, light versus dark. But all of the complexities of human emotions cannot fall into just two categories, y'all. So I want this thing to come up quite a bit, which is polarity. The polarity of good versus bad needs to be a moral subject that having the set schedule and the time conformity maybe puts everything, blocking out the bad and just going with the good, when everyone has bad thoughts, right? Acting on them is different, but it's natural to have bad thoughts and to only go with the positive and never accept the negative. The energy of the world doesn't work that way. A battery doesn't work that way. Energy does not work. If you take the negative terminal off your battery, the car doesn't start. So a utopia where there's only good and no bad cannot be a true utopia because you don't have the complexities there, right? So from here, we're going to start with Act 1. After this segment, I'm going to start the blog, and I'm going to start Act 1, and I'm going to start writing the opening of the story, which is probably going to be not centered around Detective Barstool at the beginning. He's going to be kind of a middle character that becomes a character. We're going to start with Jax's brief story. So it's going to start with Jax waking up and being visited by a man who calls himself Frank Fox and claims he's from the future and says, "Hey, you're going to work today, but what if you went for a walk and thought about that?" So that's the first time that someone broke the time conformity and schedule, did not show up for work, and instead went for a walk and thought about it. From there, it's investigated by Detective Barstool, who can't make heads or tail of this. He's just a detective, right? So he has to confer on the scientist, the behavior scientist, Bart Claypool, which then brings it to his pool of people, and they start saying, okay, this person broke the time conformity, which is wrong. Except Cynthia, the sin of night, Cynthia of Night, brings up to Bart, hey, we can do that? As in, we can not show up for work if we don't want to? But the antagonist, Hector, says, no. You can never break the singularity. Where Bart's kind of on the fence, right? So Bart's kind of teetering on the thought that JJ originally had, which was, why don't we just stop and think about this? And that's where the thought experiments come, okay? The behavioral scientist, Bart, has his first thought experiment. Thought experiment. So, in this experiment, Bart, Cynthia, and Hector are weighing the thought. You can do that? And that's where we're going to start this story off at, right? Do you guys have any thoughts on the overall story? What do y'all think about this so far? Let me know. I'm going to sit down for a minute, just jot down a few things and have a sip of my drink. If y'all are just joining us and haven't joined us before, we are doing a creative writing session where I actually have a drink and anyone else who wants to have a drink also has a drink. Also wanted to show y'all again Deborah Horn gave me this awesome glass to drink from, Infoxicated. I think it's really cool that we added a character named Fox, which was James's idea. Y'all let me know if anyone's having any problems seeing the screen right now. Donna says yes. All right, good. So we're all still on the same page. Let's go ahead and let's finish naming Hector. Hector's the antagonist. Hector is also he's also one of the scientists, right? He starts off as a good character, like many characters, right? He's one of the behavior scientists, and he has good intentions, but he's ironclad on not breaking the time conformity. So that's what's going to make him the antagonist. Maybe when Bart and Cynthia start continuing their thought experiments, they'll be visited again by Frank Fox after JJ has been locked away. And maybe Frank Fox will say, you know, y'all are on the right path here. Maybe y'all should think about it. Which is going to create a segment of thought experiments. And by thought experiments, maybe the three of the scientists would say, you know, they're going to analyze JJ's decision to go for a walk instead of work. And they're going to write down a bunch of scenarios, right? A bunch of, what was he thinking? Why would he go for the walk? Why would he think a walk is more important than work? Why would he break the singularity and time conformity for something as simple as going for a walk? Why would you commit a crime just because you wanted to go think for a little bit? And that's where the thought experiments really get out of hand, right? And Hector starts getting upset at Cynthia and Bart. And maybe that's where the story gets its antagonist and who, you know, who's gonna maybe report them to Detective Barstool, who gave all three of them this card. We're also going to have Detective Barstool be a main character as well under these three. So Frank Fox is going to be a recurring character who is from the future, but does Frank Fox even exist? Could Frank Fox just be a thought? Maybe Frank Fox isn't even real, and the story constantly questions whether or not he's even real. So then, are all these people that have experienced Frank Fox having what is the term? A shared hallucination, right? Thoughts are the thing that has become slave to the time conformity. So maybe Frank Fox is just a break in the matrix, as James kind of said, where Frank Fox himself is just a thought and not a time traveler, but he still identifies himself as a time traveler. So we got a couple ideas for Hector's last name. Donna says Hector Gillicuddy. I kind of like that. James has an idea that has a Spanish last name, which I can't pronounce. So we're gonna let's work with last names that we can all pronounce. I do like the Spanish last name because Hector is kind of a Spanish name, right? James says Frank is the universe waking up to itself. That's a good idea. And maybe the universe waking up to itself is time itself, right? Maybe Frank Fox is the universe telling everyone that this is wrong. That he calls himself a time traveler because Frank Fox is time itself. Let's check the time here. Speaking of time, let's check the time. So it looks like we're about to wrap this up, guys. We only got 4 minutes left. Y'all tell me what y'all think in the comments about the story. No worries there, James. You know, having names be pronounceable for everything isn't that big of a deal, but for the purpose of this, let's keep it pretty simple. This is going to be a pretty simple short story. We're going to start as a short story and see where it goes. I like the idea of a collective story, a collective short story. All of us are bringing this together. Like I said, I'm going to start the blog. And I'm going to write a first act. And next time, y'all can, after reading the first act, y'all can tell me what you think and add your input. I like what we have so far. So far, we have how thought became ruler. A utopian society 300 years from now that uses time conformity and a set schedule as a singularity that controls everyone. But everyone's not controlled because everyone came to this same thought that if we all go on the same schedule, we'll all be unified. So there really wasn't police in the sense that you would either do this or beat down. Everyone came to that thought. And for 300 years, that thought lasted. But after 300 years, time itself, in the form of Frank Fox, visited JJ and said, hey, instead of going to work, why don't you go for a walk and think about it? And it became a crime, right? To not show up for work. But really the crime was to have a thought outside of the singularity, which then brings our main characters in, Bart Claypool, Cynthia Knight, and Detective Barstool, as well as Hector. So Hector's the scientist who says, no. We have to stick to the time conformity. Cynthia's kind of the devil on Bart's shoulder. Bart is the head of the department, behavioral science. And Bart's starting to think, right? He's starting to have thought experiments, and he's bringing it to Hector and Cynthia. And they buy into it. Even Hector's like, okay, let's experiment. But after today's beginning of the story, in Act 2, we'll go from there. What happens after the first initial thought experiments? What makes Hector break away from them to become the antagonist? Alright guys, I had a good time. Love seeing all y'all here. Love this story. I don't know about y'all, but this is going really well. Donna just suggested Lopez, and I like that because I like Jennifer Lopez. So we're going to make Hector Lopez. Hector with an O. Hector Lopez. So our antagonist is Hector Lopez. Our main character is Bart Claypool. And the guy who kicks all this off is JJ. So the last and final question is, does JJ's story end here? Does he just disappear in prison and is never seen again? And then it picks up here as their story? Or should we make JJ reappear a few times? And Frank Fox himself is from the future. He is a character, but we're going to keep it open that maybe he's not a character at all, and that he's actually time itself. Instead of a time traveler, Frank is time itself, waking up. That this isn't all there is. All of human complexities doesn't fit in breakfast, work, lunch, home, dinner, sleep, and good and bad. All right, y'all. Thanks for coming. I'm going to end this on some of James's music. And I hope to see y'all next time. Let's keep this going. This is Lotus Blossom by J.R. Allen. I like that. Donna says someone has to disappear down the foxhole. Maybe the foxhole is the thought, right? The new thought is the foxhole. Or the rabbit hole, right? Had a great Thirsty Thursday, y'all. Hope y'all enjoyed it as much as I did. Night, Mom. All y'all have a good night. For those of you who are still watching, one of the next segments, we're actually going to write a song together. So if anyone has any song ideas, start thinking about it. Again, this music is by James Allen, who has joined us tonight. You can see his link at the beginning of these comments. I'll also put a link for our sponsor, EBG Guitars, custom guitars and basses. El Bobby Gato makes incredible basses and guitars. Very talented dude. The link to his group is also in the comments. The song at the beginning was a new rap song that that doesn't have a title yet, but it was produced by Bo Kennedy. So we're going to wrap it up, y'all. Have a good one.